Hey guys, my name is Jordan Koss. Welcome to the Almost Essential podcast. This 16-episode series is based off my final project for my Doctorate of Ministry degree at Fuller Theological Seminary. The title of that final project is Almost Essential Evangelists, Improving Retirement Asset Accumulation for Mainstream Church of Christ Pastors. In this series, we will interview 8 different specialists in 8 separate episodes. And we will also interview 2 pastors from each of 8 different regions around the U.S. This final project was inspired by 10 years of ministry in 3 different churches of Christ from Georgia to Northern California from 2010 to 2019, as well as my time as a financial professional in training in 2020. That is where I learned about the retirement crisis America is in and will be experiencing in the coming years. Now, I have 3 goals for this podcast. 1, provide an accessible, denomination-specific qualitative conversation for Church of Christ pastors and leaders. 2, introduce leaders and listeners to retirement vehicles and strategies they may not have heard about before. And 3, provide encouragement, motivation, and knowledge to save for the last third of life. Thank you for listening and enjoy. Okay, everyone, welcome back. This is episode 4 of the Almost Essential podcast. My name is Jordan Koss. I am your host, and I'm here along with my co-host, Lars Coburn. Lars, introduce yourself a little bit, bud.
Yeah. It's been fun to be on this journey and now get to have one of my friends, one of our mutual friends, Dusty Breeding on. I think Jordan and I talked about this initially. He said, "Do you want to be the co-host?" And I said, "Yeah." And I got a guy that I think we need to interview, Dusty.
Yeah.
So doing youth ministry in SoCal, I got to meet Dusty and wanted to be just like Dusty. So now there's some elements, of his life that I'm drawn to too. But yeah, we're going to get into that, and I'm looking forward to just hearing more wisdom that we get to talk about on this Almost Essential podcast.
Yeah. And so Dusty is our special guest with us today. So Dusty, go ahead and introduce yourselves to our viewers and our listeners who don't know you yet.
Sure. My name is Dusty Breeding. I'm 37 years old, and I have been and was a pastor, a minister at a church for the last decade, working with students and college students, and youth group and college students. And in recent years, about 18 months ago, I quit my job and have started new adventures and new pursuits, and am excited to talk more about some of that here today. My wife and I run a company called the Skull and Bones Society, which is a growth and development and coaching business, working with clients all over the country from all different backgrounds on helping people live with the end in mind and live intentionally, and how that impacts all different areas of life.
All right, great, man. That's great. Now, I know you. You also are into CrossFit, correct?
I am. I have coached CrossFit. I started a CrossFit program at Pepperdine years ago, and it is both a hobby and has been a source of income, a stream of income for me at various times throughout my life, and just absolutely love moving my body.
That's great. I remember the first time I met you, it was that the meeting where all the youth ministers from California met down at that ship in LA, and you that one morning led everybody on like a small CrossFit workout. I bowed out. But in 2019, I started CrossFit, and it got me into great shape. So, yay, CrossFit. Awesome. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. Stone Day was always the best part of teen camp. When you were teen camp director, that was always a good memory. There's some photos of us on social media, I'm sure, somewhere out there holding the rock.
Always good times. And, fitness is such a great analogy to life, but also to finances. And we'll talk more about that, I think, in our conversation today, but just totally. About the way discipline over time creates results.
Okay, great. So let's go ahead and jump into the conversation and questions. First off, just tell us about how you came to be a financial coach.
Yeah. Well, let me start back in my hometown. I grew up in a rural community in Indiana, a small farm town. I was not a farmer. I know nothing about farming, but the surrounding area is filled with farms, dairy farms,
Indiana,
in Indiana, and so that was my upbringing. It was rural poverty. I grew up in a government subsidized housing project, actually.
Okay.
And at various points throughout my childhood, my family was at or below the poverty line.
Okay.
And we hovered at that line throughout my entire life. And I have a lot of memories, a lot of great memories from my childhood. And one of them, specifically relating to our financial situation, was a moment when my dad had lost his job and we were struggling to have food in the house. And I remember our church showing up and delivering some food on our doorstep. And that, I think, did a couple things for me. It established for me the importance of Christian community, importance of that. And also, I think, inspired in me a desire to never be in that situation again and support others to make sure that they aren't either. I had a great childhood, though. My parents gave me everything that you could imagine you would need to develop well. So no critique there. A lot of their financial struggles were related to circumstances of life, and they utilized credit cards to get by. And so I learned that method. I used the credit card anytime I needed it or wanted it. That led to a lot of poor decision making financially. One of the stories I love to tell is when I became a college student and they were offering me a student loan package. They told me the amount that I needed, and then they said that I could take an additional amount to cover rent or to cover food or things like that. And I took that money and I went and I bought a Jeep Wrangler.
Oh man! Oh, that's where the Jeep came from. Okay,
that was my first Jeep, and that was a bad financial decision, but it's indicative of the way I handled money. Then when I started dating my wife, we started doing some premarital counseling, and in the conversation with our therapist, we had done an assessment, a compatibility assessment, and that assessment revealed that she and I had drastically different views on money. And we had not crossed that bridge yet. We hadn't really talked much about that. And he indicated to us that that's a big deal because money is one of the leading causes for divorce, or disagreements over money is a leading cause for divorce. And so that inspired us to get this dialed in. About a year after we got married, we were living in Kenya, working with street kids in the slums of Nairobi through a ministry called Made in the Streets. And realized that we needed to get our finances in line. And that's where a family friend told us about the Dave Ramsey Total Money Makeover book. I downloaded it on my Kindle while we were living outside of Nairobi, and we read it in a few days, and that changed the course of our life, our financial life, for sure.
Okay, awesome.
Yeah, that's kind of an overview.
It's awesome. I'm a Midwest kid as well, born and raised South Detroit, Journey Song,
Awesome.
So what town in Indiana was it?
Yeah, it's a town called Andrews. So northeast Indiana, about 45 minutes south of Fort Wayne is where I'm from.
Yeah, awesome. That's great.
And where in Detroit, you said? What side?
It was a downriver. It was Allen Park, downriver suburb. Yeah.
Cool. We own a couple rental properties in Detroit now, so I'm always curious about that area. So you have to tell me if you have any good tips on where good areas are.
Yeah. Go ahead, Lars. Yeah.
I've got the tip for you. Not the Detroit tip, but the tip that I've heard from investing in homes is Costco. Costco does this immense research on developing communities. And when they build a warehouse or locate a warehouse, they've done a tremendous forecast for the population growth and kind of the community. And so one of my friends who's an investor in real estate has been talking about how Costco can be one of those cheat sheet things you look at a community, because they're doing all of that work much more than you could maybe on your own. But Jordan has more of the actual geography.
That's a good tip, though. That's a great tip.
Yeah. Do you own your properties in Detroit, the city itself? Is that where you own those properties, or in the metro area?
Metro area.
Okay.
They're on the west side in
Okay.
a suburb
Gotcha.
outside of Detroit.
Nice. Okay. Got it. I know back in 2008 or 9, Time Magazine did like a year-long like piece about the city of Detroit, and so that Detroit is actually the third largest in terms of square mileage city in the country. And
Mm,
because they lost so much of a population base because of white flight, the tax base couldn't support that large of a city, so they would shut certain sections of the city down in terms of water and light and serve other services. And so it's hopeful. I have hope for the city of Detroit and kind of making a comeback like other cities have.
yeah,
But
we do as
yeah,
well, and we believe in Detroit, and in our experience there, it is very much block by block. You hear people say that, like you can
yeah,
drive through an area that is where there are literally houses that look like they've been bombed out,
yeah.
and then you go a couple blocks in the other direction, and there's a really nice community. So it's a unique area, but we think it has great history as a city.
Oh yeah,
I think
totally.
it's a great location for potential for growth. So we've enjoyed having a connection there over the last 5 years or so.
Yeah, and good pizza too. If you've never had Detroit style pizza, man, you got to try it.
I haven't. That is such a good tip. I've not yet. We'll have to do that when we go visit.
Yeah, Buddies. You got to go to Buddies. That's what I hear.
Okay.
All right.
Cool.
All right. Second question. What is your own personal approach to accumulating assets for retirement, and what do you typically advise your clients to do?
Yeah. Yeah. It's a great question. And I would say that oh, what I do is the foundation for also what I recommend my coaching clients as well, with some nuances. Everyone's financial situation is very personal, both the dollars and cents, but also their values related
Mhm.
to that. And so I believe there's some principles that are great for everyone, but I think there's a lot of nuance and a lot of room for freedom and
Yeah.
creativity and flexibility within that. And I would say the way that my wife and I have approached our finances over the last decade is, first of all, from a position of being lifelong learners.
Mhm.
Neither she nor I had great financial training or wisdom. We had a
Yeah.
lot of work to do. We had a lot to learn. And
Mhm.
I, today, a decade into this journey, have a lot to learn, and I consider
Yeah.
myself a learner. Um, I think a few things that have been principles for us is to live below our means. I
Right.
think that is an abiding principle that we have chosen to live by and is a framework for everything we do. So, at a
Mhm.
foundational level, we spend less than we earn, and we do that every month and have for the last decade.
Mhm.
Another principle and another process that we live by is paying off our debt and living debt free. We
Yeah.
have been debt free for a decade. It is a commitment that we have made to one another that we won't take on debt. All the rental properties we own them outright. We pay cash for them. All of our vehicles we pay cash for them.
Nice.
It is our commitment to one another to continue that journey and that process. I don't know that, or I don't think that that is the only way
Sure.
to do investing and to do rental properties. That is just a personal choice that we have chosen.
Sure.
More specifically, we try to max out all of the matches that we would get from any companies that we have or do
Mhm.
work for. Then we would max out any tax deferred retirement accounts, and
Right.
then after that, then we start to consider additional options, whether it be mutual funds or building a stock portfolio of funds, or rental properties, and we kind of balance and do a little bit of both.
Mhm.
And our system is to create multiple streams of income. It's a very common term these days, but to create
Yeah.
income coming in from different sources to create a little bit of resilience, so everything's not in one particular area.
Right.
So that's basically what I guide my clients to do.
Mhm.
I'm not a get rich quick guy.
Yeah.
I'm not inspired by people who are teaching that. I don't
Mhm.
think that first of all, I don't think it is the safest route to pursue.
Mhm.
And also, I would say that wealth is not a goal of mine.
Mhm.
Instead, I would say wealth has been a byproduct of discipline and pursuit
Okay.
of living well in a lot of different areas. And so when I work with clients, I'm not particularly interested in helping them be wealthy just to be wealthy. one of my first questions I ask is, why do you want more money? Why do you want a bigger retirement account? And how much is enough? How will you know when you've reached the right amount?
Mm-hmm.
Now, that might include building wealth. I'm not opposed to building wealth, but simply the pursuit of money to have more is not something that I pursue, nor do I teach. I would say another part of my practice is helping people clarify their goals. So what do you want to do with the money that you have? Are you doing that now? A lot of times I've found that clients or people I work with have a vision of what they think they will do when they have a certain amount of money, but they're not engaging in those hobbies or practices or lifestyles now. And so sometimes it's clarifying, like, hey, maybe that's not really what they do want. Or maybe it's clarifying that, you can explore today with a little bit what you desire to do later with more.
Mm-hmm.
So that's several of the things that I focus on in my coaching.
That's great. Lars, do you have any follow-up to that?
Well, I mean, as we've talked before, Dusty, about values and stuff, you've talked about the value of freedom. And as I think a little bit we're focusing on pastors and things, I think there's a story, a narrative that comes through where we get a little dependent, we're driven to sometimes stay in ministry longer out of this anxiety. Can we do something else? We might have things, whether it's health insurance plans or minister housing allowance, or, I mean, you guys had a beautiful house looking out over the ocean. There's things that pull us back in that are sometimes not in line with our values, right? And so as we're talking about this issue of retirement and things, I think not just talking about the vehicle of retirement being broken, but also our way of imagining what retirement's purpose is. So the values come in, I think, and are really huge. And as I talk to you more and more, and as I read some stuff that you're putting out from Skull and Bone Society, I'm again reminded that it's really not about how much you have in the bank or what job title you have or how much money you're making, but are you able to live into your values? And that's really helpful for people to kind of think through before they get all the other stuff out of the way. Because why do you need the retirement? And we've talked about this in a previous episode or two, touched on it. This idea that we want to be useful, or we want, when we run out of being useful to our church, right? When we're no longer able to maybe cognitively deliver a sermon or run a youth group camp, churches should care for us, and we should be able to live out our life and live into our values beyond our quote unquote useful days. And so I love that idea of keeping the end in mind. And I'd encourage people to, follow Dusty on Instagram. He's got some good, thoughtful reflection questions for you guys. And that's a better use of your social media scrolling time than some of the other stuff out there.
Yeah, I go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, Lars, that reminded me of something that that my wife and I talk about regularly, that I don't know that I can make a biblical or theological case for retirement. I'm not convinced that there's anything in the text that says this is a biblical thing. And so I think it is a modern creation. I don't think it's wrong, but neither my wife nor I actually plan on doing what Americans might call retiring. I don't envision ever a day in my life where I am not working or contributing to society and being financially compensated for it in some way. Maybe when I'm 70 and I may change my tune on that, but I do think that there's an unhealthy narrative of work, crush it, break your back until you hit 65, and then you get to sit on the beach and relax. And I don't think that's biblical. And I don't think that's necessarily life-giving.
Right. Yeah. The idea of retirement as withdrawal and or vacation is definitely not a biblical concept, very negative concept. And I think that perhaps sometimes, maybe for me, maybe for others, causes us to view saving for retirement in a negative way. So is there a way that you frame retirement that can help free up people to say, no, it is important to save for this thing we call retirement?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I'm often reminded of one of my favorite quotes from Richard Foster, who wrote Celebration of Discipline. He says, "Every freedom has its corresponding. Every discipline has its corresponding freedom. Every discipline has its corresponding freedom." And the sentiment in this conversation is, I see setting aside a little bit today as a process of discipline that is rooted in wisdom. There's you all know Proverbs has such deep wisdom, and there is a way to pursue wisdom financially, and I think being disciplined with a little bit provides freedom later in life. And so, from my perspective, I'm a big proponent of starting early and doing it in a manageable way that doesn't become your life obsession, that simply becomes like brushing your teeth. I want people's wealth building pursuits to be as structured and as simple and occupy as much time in their life as regular rhythms of the day, so that when they reach a point later in life, they have the freedom to choose to do things with their day and with their time that they feel is most meaningful and aligned with their values and who God has crafted them to be. So that's the way I frame it. I think it is a righteous path. I don't think obviously I'm saving for retirement. I don't think there's anything sinful or wrong about wealth building or saving. But I think maybe what space it occupies in your heart and in your mind is really important.
Right. I make like 5 assumptions in the introduction to my paper so far, and one of them is, so the stereotypical view of retirement as withdrawal and vacation. Okay, we all know that's wrong. Right. Let's reframe it. And one author says the third age, where we're able to live out our values and live into this, being a Christian the way we're able to be this last third of life. All right. A lot of and what I found was interesting. A lot of like theology books don't dive into the subject of retirement, specifically ones dedicated to talking about money and possessions. They might touch on it at surface level, but they don't dive in and really discuss it. And that was like a surprise and also a disappointment. So the one way I thought I've seen others approach this subject that I kind of like explored in my theology chapter was looking at retirement by means of the Jubilee. And the Nazareth Manifesto. John Mark Hicks talks about that, and Ben Withering talks about that, and even Walter Brueggemann kind of talks about that as well. Now, they don't dive into it in terms of the topic of retirement, but I think there's a correlation there. Any thought on that? Yeah,
it's an interesting thought. In fact, that concept, a year of Jubilee, inspired my request for a sabbatical from my ministry role several years ago, as my wife and I were reflecting on just the importance of Sabbath and this beautiful concept of the year of Jubilee. It inspired us to make the request to do a sabbatical, and that was super life-giving. So I love that concept. I think that is a great foundation for a pursuit of retirement, of leaning into that. So yeah, I like that. That's
sweet.
Super cool.
All right. Lars, anything before we move on to the next question?
Well, as we're talking about this, reframing the pursuit of retirement, I just keep coming back to what we were talking with John Mark Hicks in the previous episode about the role of the evangelist, the role of, in our movement, a desire for a less centered, pastor who has to be tied to one particular congregation. And I think the value of freedom often allows us to be free, not just financially to spend on what we want or to go on trips or vacations. Like we're not just going to get to go on the freedom of a cruise, but we're going to have freedom to bless and to speak and to minister to churches and people in new ways and fresh ways. And freedom again to plug back into the body of Christ in new ways. I think about some of the stuff you shared, Dusty, about your church there in Malibu and how you're still involved, And I think too often ministers, they do break their back and get crushed and want nothing to do with their community of faith once they're done. And yet the kind of early, maybe not retirement that you're in, obviously, but this freedom that you are in to no longer take a paycheck has actually allowed you to have a different kind of freedom of being involved in the body of Christ locally there.
Sure.
And broader, right? Your work in the broader community, your work in the Army, National Guard, and all that. So I wonder if there's some connections there too about just a flip of our imagination, where retirement or savings like this allows us to be more free in the way we use our gifts. We're not tied to a job description that a church specifically needs anymore, but we're still connected to the body of Christ in that way.
Yeah, and I think you could explore the theological implications of what discipline and freedom look like in relation to a Christian's connection with God, right? So the more attachments we have to structures of this world, is it possible that the less attachments we're able to have to God or God's direction in our life? And I don't necessarily think of my actions or decisions like this, but I think you could probably make a case that the more shackles we have to structures or systems of this world, whether that be a job or whether that be a community, or even the church, right? Like if you are obsessed or your life is committed to serve an institution, it's possible that you're not serving God in the same way that you could be if you had more freedom in your life in that way.
Okay. Yeah, nice. Let's move on to this third question, and that is related to James Knapp's 2 studies on Church of Christ ministers in Texas and nationally. And he found that COC pastors were over-reliant on Social Security and IRAs. Like over 50% of the participants, these are the only vehicles that they were going to use as retirement income to draw from in retirement. But as a result of that over-reliance, you could say they had no plan to retire yet. Many of them did not, on top of maybe working for a small church and therefore a low salary and maybe even living in a parsonage, which is negatively affects your retirement planning. Like what would you advise like a COC pastor in that situation to do?
Yeah, well, I think, I lived it, right? In the sense that, I worked for a Church of Christ, and I actually remember one of my first interviews that I had before I took the job that I worked at for a decade. I got to the end, and they basically were offering me a position, and they were offering a $36,000 salary with no benefits, no anything. And
Oh, wow.
I was not, I wasn't angry or offended. I just said, this is not realistic, right? I mean, when you start looking at that and you start taking taxes out, I mean, you're living almost at the poverty line.
Yeah.
And so I think, in a situation like that, when a church is not providing any sort of benefits, it's a very, very difficult situation to even consider retirement.
Yeah.
And the idea of over-reliance on Social Security and IRAs, I'm not convinced that is only a Church of Christ issue.
Right.
Like I think,
no.
The data you show in your research shows like this is a national challenge, right? Like people are not prepared for what we call retirement.
Yeah.
I do think that part of it in Churches of Christ is income related. I think it's an income issue for a lot of ministers. If a church is doing any sort of retirement IRA package, but you're not making very much, a percentage of your income is not very much.
Right.
But I also think there's an unfortunate reality that a lot of retirement and investing issues are personal spending habits and personal spending issues.
Yeah.
So I think that's an element that we don't talk enough about. I do think that there's a knowledge challenge as well. I think we are, as a society, are not well educated on how to manage money. I think that is in part due to the secrecy of money, not talking about salaries, not talking about ways to incrementally build wealth. I think that is a poverty of knowledge that exists. And I also think part of it is a long-term goals issue, just not clarifying, not taking the time or having the discipline to look ahead to the future and envision what life would be like and how you can prepare to enter that stage well.
Yeah. Yeah. And if you don't mind me asking, what region of the country was that church that gave you that offer before you got to Malibu?
Yeah, it was in the Midwest.
Midwest. Okay. That makes sense. That makes sense. All right. Any follow-up there, Lars, on that?
Well, I think, we're also thinking about pastors and elderships and others that might be tuning into these things. We don't have to reinvent the wheel when it comes to some of this stuff. A school district around you, the public school district, has a published step and grade plan. They have the benefits package. They've done the research to say, what does it take to have someone live in this community and work in this community? And so, following your local school district, I often want to advocate that we should be better than the school district if we want to care for our pastors well and communicate care as kind of as a justice thing. If they're going to be caring for the community, we should be caring for them well, and that probably means a little bit better than the school district. Otherwise, we're asking them to do kind of to take a vow of poverty, and I'm not sure that that's super biblical. And then the other thing I would just say is, as Dusty, you're kind of a good example of this. I think we'll get into it, but the idea of bivocational ministry is not a bad thing. And so I think if you're a pastor in this situation that we've just described, talk to your eldership. If they can't offer you a better package, ask them to reduce your hour commitment. So they keep the same salary amount, but offer you the chance to work vocationally somewhere else as in addition. Then you might be bringing home, in fact, above the average salary, and actually might be a great gift to your church.
Yeah. Lars, on that note, my decade was spent working at the University Church of Christ at Pepperdine, and when the elders were building salary packages for staff years and years and years ago, rather than reinvent the wheel, they essentially just copied the structure and format that the university uses for its staff.
Interesting.
And so I think what you're suggesting is super wise. I think that makes sure that a minister's structure is reflective of the congregation and the community, and it also provides usually some decent structure for retirement and things like that. I like it.
Great. That's awesome. That's a good idea for others to kind of emulate. Question 4: were you aware of Ghilarducci's argument about a DIY retirement crisis already, and what are your thoughts about her argument about traditional retirement vehicles?
Yeah, I'm not. I wasn't familiar until I read your writing. So I'm not familiar. I fully agree that there is a retirement crisis. I think people are reaching that stage of life, and all of the stats show they're not financially prepared to do anything above a mere existence. I also think, just a little caveat here, I also don't think merely existing is wrong. I don't think it's necessarily morally wrong.
Right.
I do think that having enough to pay your bills and feed yourself is best for society, but I also don't think having more than that and excess is a moral responsibility or a moral requirement. This book is old now, but the book When Helping Hurts, I think really reframed my understanding of how we approach societal problems. And if we think of it in terms of money, money's always going to be the answer. But in my personal experience of growing up in poverty, a little more money would have brought some security. That would have been really nice. But I actually had everything else that I think was more important in my formation. And so I don't want to convey the sense that that someone who is merely existing is less than or has not accomplished something in their life.
Yeah.
Now, with that said, I of course desire that all humans have financial security and peace. But I just want to say that, like, I think we do have a retirement crisis. People are struggling to live. There are things that can be done.
Yeah.
I'm not convinced that the vehicle, as you mentioned, I'm not convinced the vehicle is the problem. I actually think the driver is the problem.
Okay.
This is just my personal responsibility take. I think that whatever the government does or whatever your company does is great. I'm supportive of them cultivating new tools and new vehicles. But in my opinion, it is dangerous to rely on them to make the change.
Sure.
I think there's a lot that can be done at the level of the individual to transform your retirement and to transform your path. I think people are living moderately longer. I don't think that has drastically changed over the ages, but I do think that people are healthier longer and are doing more things later in life. I also think the use of debt has exploded. And so I think that has warped our understanding of what is normal or what the Joneses have. And so we find ourselves comparing ourselves and our situation of life, and it can be very skewed. I remember I watched a Vice documentary a couple years ago about people in Miami who will, save up for a month to rent the Lamborghini for one night, 3 hours of Lamborghini rental to cruise strip just so people see them in a Lamborghini. And that is a problem, but that is a personal problem. That is not a retirement vehicle or issue that can be fixed with a new plan or a new retirement structure. So I think lack of training, lack of knowledge, lack of discipline, I think those things are what I see are big challenges to retirement in the country.
Okay. Yeah, Lars, go ahead.
Yeah. So, and for the most part, we're on the same page with this, Dusty, but I just get to press you here as a friend. So, I like to run marathons, but I don't often like to train for marathons. So, I kind of see retirement. It's like it's way out there, just like my marathon that's coming up in 2 months. But today I got to do the discipline of getting on the treadmill or getting out and running. And that's kind of what you're talking about. But we're fallen, sinful. We're, as Christians and as pastors, we kind of know this. There's sin. There's something going on. There's broken. We're not capable of really being the true image bearers of God we were created to be initially. So what do you say to that kind of idea that I'm a broken individual and I don't do a good job of saving. I'm not disciplined. I want to be, but I'm just not. And I guess I would be curious what you would say to that idea of, like, is there a corporate responsibility of our churches? Is there something that's saying, yeah, I know that Dusty is disciplined, but I can't always expect Lars to be disciplined, and am I responsible to do something even though Lars isn't going to? In many ways I think about it this way. It's like, if I give Lars a stipend and say, Lars, here's $1,000, spend it wisely. One of the things I'd encourage you to do is go out and get a health insurance plan. I'm not going to buy you a health insurance plan, but I'm going to give you $1,000 and hope you go find good health insurance. But Lars can pocket that money and go buy a Jeep Wrangler. Am I, as a church, maybe responsible to say, I'm not just going to trust that Lars is going to be good discipline. I'm going to buy Lars a health insurance plan because I think for his health, and so retirement comes in there as a vehicle. What do you think about that?
Yeah. Well, I think a couple different things. I love the phrase that a rising tide lifts all ships. And so I think in this scenario, I think that there is a societal good that is accompanied by us collectively pursuing and supporting supporting the well-being of others. I'm fully supportive of that. I hold that in one hand, and in the other hand, I hold the just simple reality that I cannot rely on someone else to do it for me because they might not. And so I think there's a balance there. And so in my personal life, like I'm an advocate for, companies or elders, the government. I'm an advocate for them creating better vehicles. I'm not opposed to that. I take advantage of the vehicles that exist, right? So I'm thankful for the retirement options I've had in my ministry job and the Roth IRA and tax deferred accounts. Like, that's awesome. I'll use it if they create it. But I also think that there's some personal responsibility that comes into play here, and I want to be someone who is, to the greatest extent that I can be, is in charge of my future, and I have a personal commitment to try to support that and others as well. So I don't necessarily think, I'm not saying that I think it's wrong that that we create systems. Like I said, I use them, I benefit from them, but I would not hold out hope that someone else will do it for me.
Right. No, totally. Awesome. Switching gears to the DIY, from the DIY retirement crisis to Ramsey's advice.
Yeah.
So based upon my research, it seemed like Ramsey's advice almost correlated with what Ghilarducci was saying. Hey, don't do that. So do you think Ramsey's advice for accumulating retirement assets is only for the rich, like the top 10%, and not so much a good approach for pastors in the American DIY retirement crisis, because often majority of pastors don't have a low salary and they aren't considered to be in that higher echelon of income?
It's a good question. My anecdotal experience is that, I started out $85,000 in student loan debt, and within a decade had become a millionaire. And that was simply by following Dave Ramsey's system. Okay. I'm not a Dave Ramsey ambassador. I don't get paid by Dave Ramsey. I don't even necessarily love his style all the time, but I think that the system is a structure of discipline, and so I think I would actually say that I think his system is designed for the poor. I actually think that, that the structure and system is designed for low income earners to make incremental steps that hack your psychology, recognizing that money is not just logical, but there are emotional elements to finances, and to utilize that to help you build incrementally over time. And so I think it is definitely a DIY retirement approach in that regard. So I totally get why the other author is opposed to it. But I would also say that it is still utilizing retirement vehicles that are not necessarily simply DIY, right? Like I don't think it's not just make money. It is utilize systems that exist as well. So that's just been my personal experience with it, is that it helps us find wealth.
Okay. That's great. That's awesome. Lars, any follow up to that, man?
Yeah. I mean, we've talked, and with Teresa Ghilarducci, one of the observations was, do a budget every month. Right. And she talked a little bit about how there's that shame that then can drive you into just kind of ignoring your spending habits, and things can get out of control if you don't kind of bring that up close. And I think that's, if I have one really supportive vision of the envelopes and of the kind of the making sure that every dollar is accounted for, and the lack of debt, cutting up the credit cards, it's dramatic at times. And, for me, I haven't found it useful that way. Maybe I'm a little more financially savvy though, and because I got an accounting degree. So, but what I did find, and what's been true in my life, is the years that my wife and I have had a budget every month where we're tracking expenses, and that has been when we've been the best. We've had our best financial times, and so I think that's the thing that I would encourage people to look at, is like, whatever system you're using, whether it's Dave Ramsey or some other system, if it doesn't have a monthly budget, it's probably not going to help you. And so, then we can argue about some of the investment vehicles and advice later. But I think I agree with you, Dusty, that sometimes Ramsey's approach and others, we can argue about their investment vehicles and some of their advice that they get going down the road. But the initial system, let's keep our finances in front of us and track our income and expenses, that's just good business sense, and it's really, really, really wise. And it removes that ability for shame, and keeps you kind of grounded. So I agree with that. I think I would ask, so with the Ramsey approach and financial peace, what's one thing you're uncomfortable with, Dusty, with it? Or maybe it's down the road, maybe it's not in the initial stuff, but what's one thing that you've found as you've followed Ramsey, or as you've had other people in your life use the financial peace model? Because it's taught a lot in Christian circles, it's offered at churches a lot. What's one thing you would say, hey, this I'm not so sure about, or I have a critique?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think one just simple reality is that it is a get rich slow plan, and that is hard. It is hard. Some of the clients I've worked with, or I imagine people, when you're looking at a low income, lots of debt, maybe some unfortunate circumstances, maybe sometimes poor spending habits, can be both, right? Sometimes life happens and it's outside of your control. But when you are swamped in debt, are a low income earner, the path is arduous, the path is long. And so I think it's not a critique necessarily of the Ramsey system per se, but it's just a simple reality that for some people, building wealth is lifelong, right? And they may never achieve what we call wealth. And that is just a simple reality. So I think one of the things that I do like about the system that isn't emphasized enough is actually what he titles his like the training that they do in churches is financial peace. And so I think peace is different than wealth. Peace, when I work with clients talking about finances, sometimes peace comes through simply having a plan. And so I think that's a big element of my work, and what I'm passionate about is helping people find peace through that journey, if that makes sense. I'm also I'm not like I said, I don't get paid by Dave Ramsey. I'm totally down to learn. I love CrossFit, and one of the things I loved about CrossFit when they started the CrossFit Games was they were like, hey, if you do something else and you can come to CrossFit and beat us at the games, we'll start doing what you do. Right?
Okay. That's funny.
Like they weren't committed to their system. It was they just cultivated something that they think works. And I don't know, in the 2 decades or 15 years of CrossFit, I don't know if anyone has come from another sport. I don't know if there have been any triathletes who have come to the CrossFit Games and won the games, right?
Oh, interesting.
So, I think about that in this conversation. Like I'm not committed to the Ramsey system. It has worked for us. I've seen it work for others, has worked for some of my clients. But I'm totally open to learning and new opportunities as well.
Yeah. So that's a perfect segue into the next question, which is, what are your thoughts about using life insurance for retirement income, especially in light of like Ramsey's and the Wall Street Journal's disparagement of utilizing life insurance like Index Universal Life for retirement income, and then Doug Andrews and Patrick Kelly saying, hey, you should really be looking at this to be the foundation of your retirement planning in terms of financially?
Yeah. Well, I have to acknowledge some of my ignorance here. I am not super well versed in the whole life insurance and life insurance world. I absolutely would say that is not an area that I feel super well trained in.
Sure.
My only experience or thoughts are hesitation, and for sure that is informed by my experience with Dave Ramsey and the limited research that I've done to try to get somewhat of an understanding of that. I don't use use it as a tool myself. My limited understanding is the high cost and poor rate of return make it not the optimal tool. I also, and I would say maybe one of the things that concerns me the most is that I don't know anyone who recommends it who doesn't also sell it. Right? And so I've never met anyone who doesn't sell some type of whole life insurance or something like that who recommends it. Now maybe they exist. I would love to meet someone who does it and like is a big fan. But I just personally I haven't met anyone who's like, this is the best tool, and I don't sell it. Everyone I've met sells it.
Yeah, there's two organizations. One of them is LIMRA. I forget the other one that follows life insurance and in terms of the number of policies every year. And they both say IUL is one of the hottest life insurance product over the course of the past 10 plus years, which is very interesting. So there seems to be some perceived value by others. But it's the same thing. I never heard about it till I tried to sell it as a financial professional in training. And whenever I would speak with others, potential clients on Zoom and tell them about it, they had never heard about it. So there was that initial obstacle of like, I don't know about it, so I'm uncomfortable with it because I had no clue what it is. And it is difficult to understand. And that's another roadblock as well. Even for me, a guy who's written on it now, 170 pages about it, it's still difficult for me to kind of like, okay, how can I explain this to somebody again? Yeah.
Well, and again, like I said, I'm totally down to learn. I acknowledge my limitation here, and when I talk with clients about this, I acknowledge that this is not my area of expertise. But I think it's an interesting concept based on what I read from your document as well.
Yeah, it's and if anybody wants to check it out, there's Doug Andrew has a YouTube channel, and it's with tons of videos talking about this concept and that approach to retirement income and investing in retirement. So check out Doug Andrew on YouTube if you're interested. It's pretty easy. Just check him out there. Lars, any follow up to that?
No, I mean, again, I'm out of my depth when it comes to insurance and those kind of things. I think the thing I always come back to is can you trust the advisor? So where I would push is that not all of us are going to be, as self-disciplined, and not all of us need to get a master's degree or a certificate in business or finance. I've been wrestling with this. What is good ministry preparation for pastors? Because my mix coming from an undergraduate in accounting and then getting my theology degree in seminary, left me kind of wondering, is Bible college the right mode? Are our liberal arts universities actually training good pastors? They're maybe getting to deconstruct more than they need to, or and then on and on it goes, even in seminary, where at Fuller Seminary, there was over 50% of the graduating classes weren't going to work in traditional ministry. So, I think from an education standpoint, I agree with Ghilarducci and others that we can't educate our way out of this crisis. So for the broader public, I'm not 100% sure that financial education is the goal. But discipline education, that's where I think there's got to be kind of a mix, a CrossFit of sorts that finds ourselves in there. Because I think, some of our spending habits, some of our bad discipline are connected to other forms of our life habits. And so we've been talking a little bit in this conversation, Dusty, already about kind of the soul care piece component of this, that this is good soul care as we're caring for pastors from the church standpoint. And I do think there's a responsibility, a corporate responsibility maybe aspect in there, but the education for the individual comes in there. I don't know that it's, everybody has to go through a Dave Ramsey financial piece, but maybe it is. Maybe it's something more accessible like that than a master's degree in a master MBA or something. I'd rather see that kind of gift mix of soul care that includes some financial things, includes some health, taking care of your body,
Mm-hmm.
finding time. I think we could talk a lot about time management skills in ministry too. Are you finding time for yourself and for the passions that keep you going? That might solve a lot of these we get ourselves into financial debt often chasing that piece you were talking about.
Sure. Yep.
Yeah. As we wind down this conversation, because I know we don't have much more time, what are some other streams of income that a typical Church of Christ pastor could reasonably pursue, let's say in a high cost of living area like California?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think this is where pastors, ministers really have a leg up on the game. Most ministry jobs that I know of have insane flexibility in comparison to the general public. Maybe not true for all, but my experience of anyone who works in a ministry field, all they would need to do is explain the situation to an eldership and make a reasonable request for some sort of schedule adjustment, whether that be coming in later on some mornings or leaving earlier, working different hours. I think there's lots of room for flexibility for additional streams of income. And I think we often go too highbrow, meaning I think there's nothing wrong with a minister at a church delivering pizzas on a Thursday or Friday night. There's nothing wrong with that. Providing for your family is honorable, regardless of what the job title is or what you're doing. Being fiscally wise is honorable. Now, there might be better ways to do it than just delivering pizza. I think I know of people who I consider successful professionals who drive for Uber on the weekends or in the evenings. I know numerous people who pursue side hustles in various hobbies. Something I did throughout the decade of my work was teach fitness classes early in the morning. I would teach a 6:30 a.m. workout class a couple times a week, so I was able to make it to the office when I needed to be there. So I think turning your passion into a source of income is a great route. But I would say it really comes back to conveying the need to your eldership, to your leadership, expressing and understanding that maybe due to church's financial situation, they don't have a lot of flexibility in their budget. So you're requesting the ability to seek additional income streams. Throughout my decade, I probably every day of 10 years, I had at least 2 to 3 different streams of income. I taught adjunct at Pepperdine. I taught fitness classes. I would pick up odd jobs on Craigslist. I would literally, drive. One time I drove a woman's urine sample to the clinic because she was paying me $25 an hour to run errands for her. Right. And I was a 27, 28-year-old professional with, at that point, probably close to $500,000 in retirement. And I was not above driving a urine sample, right? So I think there are opportunities to be intentional if you look for them, and I think ministers have the perfect job to do it.
I know one thing I did when I was a seminary student is I donated blood plasma for like $80.
Yeah, that's great. That's great.
I was like, score! I got to read and make money.
Yep, that's great. I love it. I love it.
Okay, and one of the final questions is, do you think it is wise for every pastor to have a financial advisor coach, and why? And what can a pastor do if they can't afford one? And what should churches do in that regard?
Yeah. Well, my first response would be, I don't think ministers can afford not to have one, right? I think this is such a high impact investment that if you're not doing it, it will cost you more than it costs today to do it. So now with that said, I think there are a lot of different avenues to approach that. I think YouTube is a great resource. If you make building your knowledge of finances your hobby, you can get a degree on YouTube, basically on wise financial management. I also think connecting with an actual advisor is wise. I work with an Ed Jones advisor and have for the last decade, and she's been great. But what has been great about her is that she has the heart of a teacher. There's no question that she is unwilling to answer for me. She takes so much time explaining. So I would say that's really important. But I also think finding mentorship from people who have found financial success doesn't cost a dime. And so reaching out to people saying, hey, it seems like you've got some things dialed in with your finances. What can I learn from you? That is everyone I know is willing to help out others if asked from a place of genuine sincerity of a desire to learn. So I think it doesn't necessarily have to be a paid situation, a lot of other opportunities, but I also think it's definitely worth the investment to do it.
Right. Okay. And Lars, any follow up on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think we default to being the expert, right? We default to seeing our role in the congregation as the person who's dispensing knowledge or dispensing care. And I've mentioned the story before about the bedside of a pastor. You go to the bedside of dying congregants, but who's going to be at your bedside? And so you need to surround yourself with some people who are caring for you, who are investing in you, and you can't just be passive about that. Like, just like you're pursuing those congregants or those youth group kids, and you're calling them up, like, who's doing that for you? Well, you better be asking. And so, yeah, I talked about kind of 3 key mentors that every pastor needs to have, and that I think you could even rotate that throughout the year. Are in 1 year, have you talked to somebody who is kind of doing some counseling, pastoring for you, and bearing your soul? And then you should be talking to somebody, at least reviewing your financial situation with them. And that's a vulnerable thing. Just find a trusted person to say, this is my financial situation, and talking with them. Because that $20,000 in debt, you may just be kind of thinking, I'll pay for that eventually. But presenting that to somebody can call into question, and they might be able to offer some insights. Hey, maybe you can deliver the pizzas. You may not have thought about it, and that person could coach you that way. So, and then the other one has to do with your own education. I think always learning. So if you're not going to a conference, but it's got to be more than just YouTube and stuff. I think having that trusted person who's 10 years, the old adage of 10 years ahead in your career path, who's teaching you things. So yeah, those 3, and I think often pastors look for the 2, the 10 years ahead in their career, education kind of thing. Maybe we have a conference that we're going to, that we go with our buddies, or the counselor. We're more aware of mental health issues now than we've ever been. But I think financial coaching is one that pastors don't think about. And I would put that in there as the kind of the 3-legged stool.
Yeah. Good. I know I didn't think about that. I did take a class in undergrad at Freed-Hardeman, and I know we have a Freed-Hardeman connection, but we never crossed paths there. But I don't remember a single thing, except one thing I remember is, like, I think they mentioned, like, the Bible mentions more about money than it does about love and faith. I was like, oh, that's interesting. That's interesting. But yeah, definitely could have used financial coaching before moving into being a pastor, being a minister, and definitely still need it today. Yeah, so that's awesome. Dusty, I'm really glad that this is one of the things you've chosen to do in your own life is helping those to pursue wealth and therefore pursue thriving, especially in the last third of life. Is there any parting wisdom or advice for pastors and or churches on the matter of this topic of accumulating assets for retirement in this kind of crazy American context that Gil Reducci calls the DIY retirement crisis?
Yeah, well, I have maybe kind of 2 different veins. I would say, first for the pastor, for the minister, the person kind of in that role. I think this is your ship. Like, you are the captain of your financial ship. Ultimately, the responsibility lies with you. And so I think the process of clarifying your destination, where do you want to be, is critical. And then charting the course. What is the path that you're going to take to get there? Now, it might be leveraging new retirement vehicles. It might be exploring some DIY options. It might be taking on a side hustle, delivering pizza. But whatever that path is, it's important to plot it out and actually have a plan. Mm-hmm. And then I would say the last thing is just, like, casting off the anchor and just going for it, right? Like all systems require you to follow them for them to work. So whether you rely on a DIY path, or whether you rely on a reformed pension system, whatever it is, you still have to show up. You still have to do the work. I don't know anyone who has invested or saved who didn't first earn it. And so you have to earn it. That's for the minister. I would say for churches, we've got to do better, right? I mean, I think we can do better. I think too often in Churches of Christ, elderships are made up of business-minded, often, and unfortunately, in my opinion, men alone, and they all have retirement packages. They all have in their businesses and their jobs, and for some reason, that doesn't get transferred into ministers' salary packages often. And so I would say, if your leadership has it, then your minister should have it too. And so I think that ministers should be advocates or elders should be advocates for ministers having strong retirement packages, but also training and education should be built into the structure. Just like the job expectation requires you to preach on Sunday, there should be some expectation that you are meeting with a financial advisor. There could be financial support for that. And then I would also say for upper level staff, if you're thinking about a preaching minister, a senior minister, my recommendation would be that you become the advocate for your youth minister, your campus minister, your secretary or admin people. You should be their advocate. You should be their biggest cheerleader for their own financial structure and sustenance. You should advocate on their behalf with the elders to make sure that they are getting retirement, that they're getting sabbaticals, that they're getting retirement packages that are helping them not hit a retirement crisis. So that's kind of the approach I would take.
Okay, great. Lars, any farewell thoughts?
Yeah, well, thanks, Dusty, for going through this time with us and really, I think, inspiring. I think that's what I love about your work, you and Cecily. Sometimes your adventures seem, big and grandiose, and other times they're, trips and you're just sharing the nitty gritty. And so I just love how you inspire us, with a 10-year paying off your debt and then becoming a millionaire, and then also saying, I'm going to carry P to the, I'm going to do that. I'm going to be that person who's willing to discipline and go there. And so I appreciate how you inspire me, continue to inspire me, and inspire others to really put on discipline and experience the corresponding freedom. So appreciate you today and always. This is like our third podcast together, man. This is fun.
Well, I appreciate you guys, and I think this is such an important conversation, and feel honored to be involved. And I look forward to seeing where this goes and how it can support ministers in their journey.
We appreciate it, Dusty, and we appreciate you for joining us once again today in episode 4. And for our viewers and listeners, stay tuned for at least 16 episodes to come out over the course of the next couple of months. Again, we are just getting started here, and we hope that you are finding value in this project that we're seeking to undertake with the Almost Essential podcast. Thank you guys for watching, and we'll see you later. Once again, thank you for listening. We hope you enjoyed this episode of the Almost Essential podcast. If you like what you heard and you want to reach out, you can connect with me, Jordan Koss, on Facebook or Instagram. We hope this series is a valuable resource for you, pastor or otherwise. And remember, you are not almost essential. Your role and service in the church is essential, as well as saving for retirement within your holy vocation and calling.